Let's look at the responsibilities of an information systems auditor with relation to network security. Network security is based on those three principles we've known for so long: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And in fact, it's within this area of network security we hear things like 5 nines availability, where a system would be up and available 99.999% of the time. That means that we could only suffer an outage of a few seconds every month. We know that we transmit a tremendous amount of data, and we need to protect the confidentiality, the privacy and secrecy of that data going across the network. This often requires things like encryption to ensure that even if somebody's been sniffing the network, they're not going to be able to see confidential information. We have to make sure that we have integrity of our data, which means the data we send across that network is the same when it's received as it was when it was sent. This, of course, means we have to put in place the mechanisms to prevent then the loss of integrity through noise or some type of interruption of the line, or maybe through a malicious activity where a person has tried to change the data which has gone through that network. So our responsibilities as an information systems auditor is to make sure that the people looking after the network of our organization have the appropriate and adequate amount of training to do their job. Do they know how to manage the system tools, the system access? Do they know how to manage the network in an effective way? Are they familiar with the risks? So they're able then to try to avert and mitigate any types of problems. Within our network administrators, we have people with a very high level of access to our information. And this is where we need to ensure we still have principles such as separation of duties and job rotation. To make sure a person cannot make a change to a configuration improperly, either accidentally or on purpose, we can use then separation of duties, reviews, checks, and balances. We can move people around so the person doesn't start getting a little bit lazy in how they look after their area of responsibility. Now, there's some real advantages to job rotation, and one of those is the ability now to ensure we have people trained within different disciplines. This cross-training will help us, so if one user is absent one day, say on vacation or leave, others would be able to step in and actually do their job for them. The problem, of course, with cross-training is that it also makes those employees that much more valuable and marketable, which means that when we cross-train people on multiple systems, we could actually increase the risk of them going to work for another organization. It is important that because our administrators, especially network administrators, have high-level ultimate access that they can do pretty much anything they want, that we have audit trails. We have a record of what was actually then done on the system, so we can trace it back, for example. We should make sure that administrators' access privileges are being managed correctly. When they no longer require that high level of access, it's taken away. Make sure only administrators are executing jobs within their expected area of responsibility. Make sure that we have adequate bandwidth and capacity to support both current and future business needs. This is where, of course, it can be very handy when we are on something like the cloud, where very often we'll be able to adjust the level of service that we actually are provided pretty much automatically on demand according to what we're actually requiring at that time. In order to provide stable and reliable network services, we need redundancy. We need redundant cabling and redundant network equipment. So if there is a failure, for example, of one piece of the equipment, hopefully there's another piece of the equipment that can continue to provide service. If there's a cut cable, hopefully there's alternate cable routing that could also be used. We should, of course, review then remote access. If a person, for example, administrator, is going to manage a network device using something like Simple Network Management Protocol, we should make sure that that access is properly protected, because we know that something like SNMP versions 1 and 2 actually are fairly vulnerable to some type of an attack. We need to ensure that if they are using tools like that, we have set up secure tunnels to prevent other people from learning administrator passwords, for example. Some of the network controls we put in place include, first of all, knowing what we have. What do we have on routers, IDSs, IPSs? What do we have on switches? How is our network configured? What's the architecture? What is, of course, then the actual connections and what's connected to what? Every organization should have documentation adequate, so if there's a fire in the server room, they know what do they need to purchase and how do they have to configure that to get it up and working again properly. We should make sure that with our network devices, our firewalls and IDSs, for example, that we've deployed the patches that are out there that will address any types of vulnerabilities we might have in those systems. We need to ensure we have configuration management, that changes can only be made to a network once they've been reviewed. Again, this brings in that concept of separation of duties, so a person doesn't disconnect the wrong port or the wrong cable. And of course, this idea of configuration management can prevent a simple mistake then in how network devices and cabling are actually then configured and connected. We have to look at the age of our equipment. All equipment has a certain mean time between failure. How long before we could expect this piece of equipment to fail? When a piece of equipment is approaching that point, we know that we should be looking at replacing that equipment, because it is every day now becoming more likely that it'll reach the point at which it does fail. We have a lot of different types of networks we use. Local area networks are as a network within a limited area, quite often a limited geographical area, maybe a floor of a building or even a department. Quite often a local area network is one group of users, and the idea of a local area network, quite simply, is that usually it's managed by one person, under one management group, that manages that local area network and all the devices in that network according to one management, should we say, policy or group. There's always the risk of someone sniffing or eavesdropping, especially with wireless networks, but it can also be done, of course, using wiretapping on copper cable as well. There's the risk of a cut or damaged cable and loss in connectivity. There's the risk of malware using the network as a way to then infect and upset the operation of either end-user devices or other network devices as well. Today we use a lot of virtual machines, and virtual machines have some tremendous benefits. We can have one physical device that we're actually able to run multiple different operating systems and multiple environments on that one device. So that one server, for example, might look like it's 8 or 9 different servers actually, because each one is operating in a different virtual then machine world. This obviously can result in significant savings in equipment. It also has a great benefit, especially in the things like business continuity. If I lose a virtual machine, very often it's a very simple process to rebuild it and get it up and going again. The idea of the ease of the setup of that system and making sure that that virtual machine, quite often, even if that virtual machine was to run into problems, it was infected or something went wrong with it, we'd be able to just blow it away and rebuild it. It doesn't require all of the eradication of the problem we would if it was actually on the physical device itself. Each virtual machine should operate as if it's in its own sandbox, its own isolated area, where it's then not going to be affected or able to affect other virtual machines or even the underlying hardware. This can protect us from a number of different attacks. Even if one VM is to be attacked, it'll be contained within that VM and won't affect the other systems, the other VMs on that machine. Now, in many cases, the virtual machines are running on a hypervisor. And the risk, of course, is that the hypervisor does become one more area of attack, surface of attack. And so we have to protect the hypervisor as well and make sure it is properly patched. Have backup copies of your virtual machines. So what are some of the risks? Well, improper configuration could mean that that virtual machine does not properly provide isolation or separation from one VM to another. There could be those attacks at the hypervisor, especially if it's not patched, and running several machines on one box can result in some performance issues. Do I have adequate RAM? Do I have adequate CPU power to be able to then handle all those different environments simultaneously? There is, of course, this risk of data leakage between processes. Since we have several VMs sharing the same underlying hardware, there is always that risk that data from one process might end up having been accessible by another process. When it comes to wireless security, this is where we have the ease of being able to sniff wireless traffic. Anyone within the area covered by that wireless footprint can pick up all of the traffic that is going between then a laptop and that wireless access point. Now, that person who's sniffing the traffic may just be passively grabbing the traffic, or they could actively be then inserting, deleting, or modifying the data. Maybe they've set themselves up completely as a man in the middle, that all the traffic that is going from that wireless access point to the user is actually being routed to the man in the middle, who's able then to alter and read that data before passing it on to the correct user. We've also seen the attempts of people to get around the security controls that are built into some of our wireless applications. A person tried to spoof or masquerade as a cell tower. They might spoof or masquerade as a rogue wireless access point, which means that, for example, especially if they spoof or masquerade as a cell tower, every phone within that immediate vicinity will log into them. Before then, it gets passed on to the true telco in the background. If I'm able to masquerade things like, well, a common one was when we used MAC filtering, where we'd filter a wireless access point according to only certain predefined MAC addresses could connect. Well, it's fairly easy to spoof a MAC address. And so this is, of course, one of the problems we face with this. The idea of spoofing, masquerading, and then rogue or unauthorized devices. The other problem can be where the signal becomes jammed. And we've seen this especially lately in car parking lots, where many of our vehicles now have keyless entry. You've got a little key fob that if you're standing within range of your car, the doors will open, you push the start button and you can drive off. However, what happens if someone then is sitting in that area close by and sends out a very strong jamming signal? That jamming signal would mean that when the person tries to, say, lock their doors as they walk away from their car, that signal would have been jammed and the car didn't lock properly. It could be that a person is able to pick up then the actual signals being passed between the key fob and the car, which could give them the ability to then compromise that car as well. This is why when it comes to wireless, it's so essential that we use things like Wi-Fi Protected Access 2 or WPA2 as a form of encryption to protect our wireless traffic. When it comes to Bluetooth, Bluetooth is an IEEE 802.15 implementation. It is, of course, a small personal area network. In the case of Bluetooth, we'll call it a wireless personal area network, or WPAN. Some of the problems with Bluetooth have been then blue bugging. Blue bugging is able to listen in on conversations and traffic, say for example being passed to a Bluetooth device. Blue jacking is able to log in to say another person's phone and be able to, from that phone, make calls that get billed to that person. Or blue snarfing is to then connect to another person's phone and then pull all of the data off of that phone. And of course, this leads to a compromise of that person's personal data. Bluetooth also is another place where we do see the man-in-the-middle attack, where a person sets themselves up as the rogue, allowing people to connect to them before they connect to their true intended device. Now, Bluetooth, of course, is built into many of our devices today, which means that we have a tremendous amount of Bluetooth signals quite often within an area. This can, of course, provide jamming problems and other types of integrity problems, where the signal from one device could actually affect other devices. We see this, for example, within our cars. A lot of our cars now, you can, with your Bluetooth phone, connect then to the radio in the car. Well, the problem is that in many cars today, the radio is also connected then to the actual controls of the vehicle that are monitoring everything from fuel mileage to, of course, a number of kilometers left or miles left on the tank of gas. And the problem here is that that means a person with a laptop could possibly then connect with Bluetooth to the actual controls of the car. And this has been done successfully, where a person has been able then to log into a car and actually then start to apply the brakes using a laptop keyboard. So as we move more and more into the proliferation of wireless and the communications of vehicles, then of course with now becoming a part of this world of the Internet of Things, we do have additional risks creeping in because of then the inherent insecurity of Bluetooth.